Hi, welcome to Gear Debates. So, Dan is back behind the camera now, and I'm joined by Dennis, who is our technical specialist at ProAV. Is this the first episode you've been in?
Yes, this is the first Gear Debate that I'm in.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So basically,
Glad to be
Dennis
here.
is our super techie guy who lives here in the showroom, effectively doing all our customer demos. So if any of you been into our showroom anytime in the last good few months, you should recognise Dennis. So what are we talking about today, Dennis?
So today we effectively have a battle of the Mark IIs, if you will. So it would be the Sony FS7 Mark II versus the newly launched Sony FS5 Mark II.
Yep. So, I mean, a lot of this is going to be similar. We're both very, very used to these cameras. The Mark Is were essentially the same camera as the Mark IIs on both of these. So this argument has been going on for quite a while, really, and as to which one. But I think there's definitely still customers who are now starting to maybe step up to this level, or are shifting back to Sony from being with other manufacturers or something like that, who are definitely trying to decide between these two models and aren't sure which sort of form factor, which one is going to be the right one for them. So let's pick them apart a little bit. So first up, we're going to talk through image quality. Now, this might be a short one because I'm pretty sure they've got the same sensor in. Is that right?
Yes, they have virtually the same sensor in, with the caveat that the FS5 Mark II is limited to shooting 4K UHD as opposed to 4K DCI.
DCI. There's also a couple of other differences. My big one is that this has Cine EI mode, which doesn't technically get any more quality out, but does mean that it's much easier to achieve that quality than it is in custom picture mode.
Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, this has raw output without needing any additional accessories or anything like that. So you can just bolt on your Atomos recorder and get
Do
raw
we
output.
consider that? Because that can do it in body, but this can do it still. It's just that it needs the XDCA box, which is an extra expense, and it goes on the back. In order to do it, but technically they are still both capable of exactly the same raw out.
Yes. In all honesty, I would give it to the FS7 Mark II on this one, just because it has 4096 by 2160, so it's got all the 4K resolutions that you would use, i.e. UHD and DCI.
Yep.
And it's still, internally, it does it in an all-intro codec as opposed to this. But we'll get to
We'll get
codecs.
to codecs in a bit, but it does make a difference. It means that the average footage that you're going to be getting out of both of these cameras is going to be of a higher quality with the FS7. Yes. And if you want to really take the time to maximize the image quality out of both of these, yes, you've got to add an extra box to this one, but technically they can both get to the exact same point with the raw output. So let's give it just a little bit towards the FS7.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. So let's talk about low light performance.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think there's that much difference, is there? I think the FS7 is slightly better.
Because of the heavier processing that's in camera. Because that's one thing that has better processors, more powerful processors than this.
Yep.
So it's going to, it does handle low light situations better than the FS5.
Just better noise reduction and all that sort of thing that is much less noticeable, and so therefore cleans it up a lot more effectively. You can use more of it, etc., etc. So I guess they're both at the same starting point, but then that FS7 is going to get you slightly better results because of that extra processing power.
Exactly.
Let's give it that a little bit towards the FS7.
Yep.
So again, it's a very similar situation with lenses. They're both E-mount cameras. E-mount is Sony's mount. So you can use exactly the same lenses on both of them. I get the only difference I can really think of is that this has its locking E-mount on it.
And this has the standard sort of stills.
Like we used
E-mount.
to on A7s.
So I don't know, is that locking E-mount really an advantage?
Well, there's arguments that it isn't. There's arguments that it slows you down. But technically, on paper, it is an awful lot better. It can hold a lot more weight. It's a lot more secure and rugged. So if you're using big lenses, it's a no-brainer. It's a way better mount. We've also had some issues in the past with the Mark I of the FS7 and some of the FS5s where people have kept long lenses on it like this and then hit the front of the lens or kept it on in a bag and it's been knocked in transit, something like that, and the lens mount has snapped.
Yeah.
So the new mount of the FS7 does fix that. So in some ways it is better, but having to twist it makes it a two-handed job to change your lens. So you're right, it's not necessarily better, it's just different.
It supports more weight, it's sturdier, but it's also more fiddly, so it's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one.
So,
but apart from that, I don't think there's any difference, is there?
No. I would slightly give it to the FS7 just because they actually, they went, this is not working or people have been having issues with this, what can we do to fix it? And obviously because it's a much more sturdier mount means you can run around with heavier lenses without actually using lens support or anything like that. So I've seen the Fujinon Cabrio on the front of that camera with a PL adapter and there was no lens support needed or anything like that. You wouldn't be able to do that with this.
No. Cool, let's give it that little bit towards the FS7 again.
Right, let's talk about power draw.
Yep. Not the most interesting of discussion topics, really, but it makes a big difference.
Yeah, so both cameras use the same battery system, so it's Sony BPU 30s, 60s or 90s. Yep,
and there's loads of third-party options as well, so you don't have to just use the Sony ones. It's quite a nice flexible mount, really.
But there's a sizable difference in power draw. Obviously, the smaller camera requiring less power than the larger cameras. So the FS5 requires about 12 watts per hour to keep it going, whereas that one is, what, 19?
19, yeah, 19. So 12 versus 19, which is going to get you about, what, extra 50% of battery life when you're using the FS5?
Exactly.
Maybe it's also worth bringing into consideration that it's a lot easier to use V-locks with the FS7 because of the XDCA, and then also there's lots of other third-party ones, like we're using a MovCam one here on the back to connect to V-lock right now. And so obviously there's options for the FS5, but they're a lot easier with the FS7, and they fit the camera a lot better with the FS7 because of its form factor.
I would argue that there are very ergonomic products right now for the FS5 to use V-locks. There's an adapter that basically just slots into the battery slot, and you can put a V-lock on the back of it.
Who makes that?
Hawkwoods.
Nice. Okay, nice. Don't think I've actually played with those.
That's lovely. It hasn't hit the market officially
interfere
yet.
with this a little bit?
It would interfere with the viewfinder a little bit. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not perfect, but okay, cool. Bit more streamlined.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're using a very small battery like a SWIT PB or one of the Hawkwoods Minis, something like that, then there'd be a lot less interfering with anything else, and it would fit the small camera a lot better. Okay, fine. So I guess, do we just give it to the FS5?
I would, because of the lower power draw.
Draws a lot less power.
Yeah.
Probably quite heavily towards the FS5, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's delve into codecs a little bit, because this is the really big difference between these two. I mean, there's obviously the form factor, but apart from that, the codecs is a huge difference between which one of these is going to be the right camera for you. So what are we working with here?
So in the FS5, we have Sony's XA-VC-L codec, which is one of the 3 flavors in their XA-VC family. Yep. You have S, L, and I. Yep. This one has the XA-VC-L codec, which is better than the consumer-grade XA-VCS, but still not up there with the XA-VC-I in terms of image quality.
Well, that's the interesting bit, is that actually in terms of image quality, it's actually very close. L is a really good codec, but where it's nowhere near as good is in terms of efficiency. So because it's a long GOP codec, you get much smaller file sizes, and that's why it can be on a smaller camera with less processing power and with slower media, like the FS5. But then when you're in your edit suite on your computer, it's going to be substantially harder for your computer to process than the XAVCI is. So even though it's larger file sizes on the FS7, they're a lot more edit friendly, and it's going to save you a lot of time and irritation in your post-processing.
Or you could just transcode.
Or you transcode.
Which adds another step into your workflow.
It does. I often just leave it churning overnight while I go to sleep, and then it's done in the morning. So it's very doable, but yes, it's an extra step. It's an extra thing to have to worry about. And if you're handing rushes straight off to a client, then it's a no-go.
See, I would give it to the FS7 by default because that has XAVCL and XAVCI, whereas this one doesn't have the XAVCI codec.
I think there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the FS7 should win this, absolutely hands down. The other thing that's really worth mentioning is bit depth here, because the FS7 is 10-bit across the board, whereas the FS5 is 10-bit in 1080p, but then 8-bit once you get up to 4K.
So you get a lot more color into the FS7 Mark II than into the FS5, at least in 4K mode.
Yep, indeed.
So all the way to the FS7.
All the way to the FS7.
Right, so let's talk about price.
Again, nice, simple, easy one. Obviously the FS5 is more affordable than the FS7. They both compete pretty well, really, against other competitors as well in each of their various price ranges. But the FS7 is substantially more expensive. It's about $2,500 at the moment over the FS5.
FS5 Mark II,
So there is a big leap difference in terms of cost there. And in terms of media, of course, because you can have low-cost SD cards here versus XQD cards. Too many letters.
Too many acronyms.
Too many acronyms. XQD cards with the FS7, and they do cost a bit more. So, hands down, the FS7 is going to be a more expensive
camera. Yes. So we're going to have to give it to the FS5 Mark II on this one.
Yep.
Right?
So one thing Sony's always been really good at is slow motion. They've always that little bit beyond some of the competition in terms of slow motion. They have been for their last, 4 cameras really in the pro video space.
FS700 was great for slow motion. It was the first camera to give you 240 frames a second in full HD. These ones, not very much different. They still give you great slow motion performance.
Absolutely. So the FS7 can go up to 60 frames a second in 4K. Huge. And up to 180 frames a second in 1080p, but continuous. And then what can the FS5 do?
So the FS5 can do 4K up to 120 frames a second in a 4-second burst. It can do full HD at up to 960 frames a second in a burst. Although I doubt anyone's ever going to use the 960 frames a second.
960 frames a second. I really almost disagree with that being in the camera because it's such low quality that I don't think any pro video creators are going to be really using that. And so why put it in a pro video camera? It's very, very compressed, and I don't think it's even 720p in terms of resolution.
No, you do drop down in resolution. But it does 120 frames a second, continuous in full HD.
Yes,
so that
continuous
makes it
120 versus continuous 180.
Yes.
But the burst is still very useful, but probably only up to about 240 frames a second in 1080p. And then, of course, you've got the option of the raw output to give you 100 frames a second 4K. Which is fantastic.
Yes.
240 in 2K RAW as well. So that's also brilliant.
You usually find those types of specs in proper cinema cameras.
Absolutely.
In proper high-end cameras like the Sony F55 and the Kinefinities.
And even then, that's not an easy thing to do.
No,
And not a given.
No.
At all.
It requires
Really
a lot
not
of
a given.
processing power, and it requires a really powerful camera. This little beast can do it.
Yep. Well, it can output it.
Yes.
And so a lot of the processing is being done by the recorder, so whether that's the Atmos Shogun Inferno or if it's the Odyssey Design 7Q. So which one would you give it to? Because it's interesting. A lot of it, I think, depends on whether you prefer continuous slow motion or burst slow motion, because there is pros and cons of each one. I've got customers who are using the FS7 for slow motion just because they want continuous. Only continuous will do the job for them, and they want as much as possible. So the 120 won't do it. They wanted 180. Even though this can do 240 internally, but in bursts. And that's purely because of the wait time. So it's not to do with the 8 seconds or the 16 seconds or however long the burst is limited to. It's to do with then having to sit and watch it write to the card.
Exactly.
And it puts your camera out of action.
Yes. So it basically has to download the cache onto the card.
Absolutely. Yep.
So it's tricky because what type of slow motion do we really use? Do we use super slow motion most of the time where we go over 120, 160, 180 frames a second? Or do most people just use the regular good old-fashioned 2 times, 50p on a 25 timeline or 60 frames on a 24 frames a second timeline?
Well, it depends a lot on your work.
Yeah.
Really, it depends on what you do. But probably most people would find that slight slow motion of 50p, say, more. They'd find themselves using that more often than pushing it higher than, say, 100 frames a second. Just because it's a really nice level of slow motion. It's that slight dreaminess. It's brilliant for weddings. It's brilliant for B-roll in pretty much any corporate environment. It's brilliant in product shots. It's useful in so many different areas. And this is going to give it to you in 4K.
Yep. But where this really shines is where you need super slow motion, where you need to go above 100 frames a second. And if you do it externally, you're going to get a really, really good slow motion camera in this.
And one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the end trigger. Because it's in burst, it can use an end trigger, which is, for that sort of slow motion where you really need the higher frame rates, is just the best way. If you're doing wildlife or whatever, you wait till the moment has happened and then you press it.
Exactly. Or sports, for example, on running, crossing the finish line.
Absolutely.
This is the perfect camera for that.
Really, really is. So, I guess because this is slow motion, we should give it to the FS5 because it can do more.
It can do more frame rates or more frames a second than the FS7. However, it does do them differently and in a slightly more complicated way.
Maybe just that little bit towards the FS5.
Yes. Let's talk about audio on these cameras.
I was doing a little bit digging into them, and I'm not an audio guy, so I always struggle a little bit with these segments, but I couldn't find any difference between them.
They both do LPCM.
Yes, at 24-bit, they both have 2XLR channels, they both seem to have the same sensitivities. I can't see that much difference between them.
They both have the multi-interface shoe for the additional 2 channels.
Yep. They're really powerful and capable cameras when it comes to sound. They are everything you need as a run and gun or corporate sort of one-man band.
Yep.
No, let's give it a draw.
Yep, smack in the middle.
So we talked about this a little bit with cost, but let's go through the media options. And it's hard here to decide which one would be better, but let's take a look at them. So what does the FS5 record to?
So the FS5 records to regular old-fashioned SDXC cards, really affordable.
Yep.
You can pick a 128 gig card for under £100 by now.
Yep. And it's got 2 card slots.
Yeah, it's got 2 card slots.
What I love
recording.
about SD cards is that for corporate work or something like that, you can hand off the rushes. They're low enough cost nowadays that you can almost treat them as disposable media, or you can have enough of them that you can have them all over the place with different clients, and then they send them back to you, and you can have a much larger pool of media. Whereas the more expensive your media is, you tend to only have a few of them, and you're a lot more protective over them because, of course, they cost you quite a bit of money, which is maybe not so much the case with the FS7 as some other things, because XQD media is not the most expensive one out there, but it's still a lot more expensive than SD
cards. So the one thing I like about SD cards is that by now, if you're on a shoot and something goes wrong, you can walk into any store and pick an SD card.
Absolutely.
Whereas,
I mean, you shouldn't. You should buy it from us. But if you get caught,
if you get caught in the rain,
absolutely,
you know how to solve this problem.
Absolutely.
XQD cards is a bit more tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Doing a shoot on a Sunday somewhere remotely, and your cards go down, I doubt you're going to be able to find an XQD card.
Can't walk into PC World and pick one up. You can only really get them from Pro Video places.
Exactly, because they're Pro Video cards.
Absolutely. Yep,
Whereas
that does make a difference.
Consumer grade.
So,
media.
XQD though is a far better media. It's much faster, it's much stronger, more reliable, it's much better designed. It's just a better media all round, really, than SD card is.
Yep.
So that's the reason that this can handle more codecs and all the rest of it, is because it's got the throughput through to the media, and it's also going to speed up and make your life easier when you're offloading.
Yep.
Because it's a faster transfer rate. And you're going to get much less card failures and corrupt files and all the rest of it on professional video media like this than you are on consumer media like SD cards. So technically it's better, but there's a lot of advantages to using
consumer grade media. Yep.
So which way do we go? That's
this
really
is tricky.
difficult.
This is actually a tricky one.
And it is going to depend very much on your own personal preference, really, as to which direction that you value the most. For me, I'd give it ever so slightly. Oh no, I don't think I want to call it a draw. Which
I would
is
agree
odd because they're not the same. Maybe it feels a bit like a cop out, but
it's apples and oranges.
I bet you anything we're going to get loads of comments saying that how could you not pick SD cards because they're so much cheaper, and we're going to get loads of comments saying how could you not pick XQD cards because they're so much better.
So are we rating it just on the quality of the cards or the cost?
Taking both into consideration. Let's give it ever so slightly towards the FS7, and then we've made up a mind just because the FS7 has got much better media in.
See, I would give it to the FS5 because I can use these cards on other cameras as well, whereas the XQDs, I'm fairly limited to the FS7 and a couple of other cameras out there. So if the FS5 Mark II is one of my cameras, not the only camera that I have,
or you're moving from another manufacturer over to this, lots of other cameras use SD cards.
Yep. So
okay, let's give it ever so slightly towards the FS5.
I would give it to the FS5.
You've convinced me.
Brilliant.
Now, up until this point, the biggest difference between them has been the codecs, but I think that by far the biggest difference is the form factor. Yep. It's just obvious. Anyone that walks into the showroom and even looks even quickly at these two cameras can tell the difference in terms of form factor. I mean, they are very, very different.
In terms of size and weight.
Now, we have got this one rigged up a little bit here. We've got some MovCam accessories, we've got a base plate, we've got these rods on the front, we've got the power distribution box with the V-lock. So it's not really fair.
No.
But even without all that, this is still way bigger. Way bigger.
Yes, but at the same time, you can put it on your shoulder.
Oh, absolutely. It is a shoulder mount designed camera. So you put it up here, and then where's my twiddly bit? down there. I can lock it here. Yeah, do us a favour. There we go. Right, so I can operate like that all day long.
Whereas I can operate like this.
Yeah, exactly. And now that is quite nice because you can cradle it, you can get it into small spaces.
Yeah.
I found myself as a lot more creative as a shooter when I'm shooting like that.
Than when you're shooting like that.
But you get tired after an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a lot more practical for doing any interviews, anything like that. This is a lot easier to hold it still on your shoulder.
Yeah. So for these cameras, stabilized lenses tend to be crucial, especially for handheld.
Yep.
Whereas this one's just designed for basically all-day operation.
Yeah. I think a lot of this is going to come from the background and your experience and your training. Yep. If you're a TV camera operator and you're used to shoulder-mounted cameras, the FS7 is going to feel at home to you. If maybe you've worked your way up from mirrorless cameras or DSLRs, like a lot of our customers have, like I have myself, I think the FS5 feels much more at home to you and much more natural because that's what you're used to. So again, it as always, it comes down to personal preference a lot.
I think it's a bit more than that. So see, this one stripped down is 830 grams without the battery on the back. So it's a really, really lightweight camera. So once you take the side grip, the top handle, the battery, and you leave just the camera and the lens, it's very easy to mount on a gimbal. It's very easy to mount on a drone, on a buggy. In
fact, this works really well on a gimbal because this monitor, it just has a 1/4-inch thread to connect it. So it's so easy to connect to the handlebars, and then you've got a nice long cable there which you can take up, and it's really easy to take the grip off, all this stuff, and then you get a nice little, almost, it's not square, but it's almost the same as having a little square camera in the middle.
It's kind of like a cube.
Yeah. It's a really nice camera for gimbal work.
For gimbals and for drone work. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So in terms of ergonomics, I would hands down give it to the FS5.
Yeah, I think we have to give it to the FS5 just because it's going to be much more of a flexible camera for all sorts of different situations, because this isn't just about form factor, it's about convenience as well. And there's no doubt that a small camera is convenient. I think a lot of people do really like the FS7, sorry. I do think we're doing it a bit of a disservice because this form factor, the shoulder-mounted form factor, a lot of the times is the sole and only reason that people buy the FS7. People like it. People love it. If you're used to that sort of camera, it's very hard to ever operate with something that isn't that. And you find a lot of people buying the FS5 and then rigging it out entirely to turn it into something like this.
That was going to be my next point. You can turn this into a big camera or into a big system. You can't make this a small camera.
Very, very, very true.
So
very true.
This would theoretically fit more jobs than this. Because if you wanted to put that on a gimbal, suddenly you needed a bigger gimbal. This you can. I've seen this camera balanced on a single hand gimbal.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
And then there's some other convenience points here as well. They both got variable ND, which is so convenient. It's such a fantastic technology. And the FS5 has got clear image zoom, and which you don't actually find talked about that much nowadays, but I still think it's just such a fantastic technology. It's a real shame that it's not on the FS7. I thought they'd bring it with the FS7 Mark II, and they didn't. It basically turns every single prime lens into a zoom lens.
Into a variable.
Yeah. And so that is very, very convenient. And so I think there's more here than just the form factor at play that is going towards the FS5. And I think even with the form factor, yes, it's personal preference, but I think the FS5 is going to fit the bill for more people. So let's give it towards the FS5.
Yeah, definitely towards the FS5 on this one.
Okay, so thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it was
interesting cameras to debate.
Yeah,
really.
It was a real pleasure being here. So yeah, they are very, very interesting cameras, very popular at the moment. I mean, the FS7 has been popular in the UK for quite a while now. It's the #1 camera for ENG and EFP productions.
It's effectively industry standard now in a lot of different sectors of the industry.
Yep. They're just great workhorses, great cameras to work with.
On a lot of things they're so similar, and yet on a lot of things they're so different.
Different, yes.
So different. And so I think it's going to be quite challenging for people to choose between them, which is why we make these videos.
Yeah. It all comes down to what you need the camera to do.
Absolutely. So hopefully this video helped you make up your mind a little bit as to the pros and cons of each one. If you have anything that you think we've missed or that we may have got wrong, let us know in the comment section down below. Let's start a conversation of our own. Which one would you choose for the kind of work you do? Or maybe there's a competitor camera that you'd like to look at instead. Let us know in the comment section, and of course if you want to buy either of these, the links to the ProAV website are in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much, Dennis, for joining me.
My pleasure.
And I'll see you in the next one.